Okay. Good morning to everyone. Today we take a look at the book of Obadiah. Now, Obadiah is one of the 12 minor prophets. The minor part refers not to their importance. It doesn't mean that they're less importance than, say, Isaiah or Jeremiah, but it's to the length of their books. They are among the shortest books of the entire Bible. All were considered important enough to be entered into the Hebrew Bible, but none were long enough to form an independent book. So they're real short. Like the book of Obadiah is only a single chapter. And the longest of the minor prophets is Hosea and Zechariah. Each of those are only 14 chapters. Now, the name Obadiah was common in ancient Israel and Judah. It means the Lord's servant or worshiper of Yahweh. As one of the 12 minor prophets, he is one of the minor prophets. And so, but other than that, the book of Obadiah discloses nothing about him. There's virtually nothing known about what his life was about or where he came from. His book is the shortest of the Old Testament with only 21 verses. It reveals that Obadiah probably lived in a harsh and bitter era or time frame after the capture and destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. He was most likely a contemporary of the prophets Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Now, Obadiah's prophecy is unique because he doesn't deal with Judah or Israel much at all. His focus is on the sin of Edom and the judgment coming upon them. So who are the Edomites? Edom is another name for Esau, Jacob's twin brother, who was born to Isaac and Rebekah. That story is told in Genesis 25. Esau, or Edom, was born first with Jacob following, and as Scripture tells us, he was clutching Esau's heels. He was a twin. So Jacob later, the youngest, Jacob, later bargained with Esau for the birthright of the oldest son. And with Rebekah's help, Jacob deceived Isaac into giving the blessing to him, who was the youngest of the two. Now, the generations that followed Edom or Esau interfaced with Israel or Judah's history several times. In Deuteronomy 23:7 it says, "Do not despise an Edomite, for the Edomites are related to you. Do not despise an Egyptian, because you resided as foreigners in their country." So the Israelites were told not to despise them because you're related. And in Numbers 20, verses 14 through 21, talks about Moses at Kadesh, and he sent messengers to the king of Edom. "We are the descendants of your brother Israel," he declared. "You know our sad history, how our ancestors went down to visit Egypt and stayed there so long and became slaves of the Egyptians. But when we cried to the Lord, he heard us and sent an angel who brought us out of Egypt, and now we are at Kadesh, encamped on the borders of your land. Please let us pass through your country. We will be careful not to go through your planted fields, nor through your vineyards. We won't even drink water from your wells, but we'll stay on the main road and not leave until we have crossed your border on the other side." A simple request. But the king of Edom said, "Stay out. If you attempt to enter my land, I will meet you with an army." "But sir," protested the Israelite ambassadors, "we will stay on the main road and will not even drink your water unless we pay whatever you demand for it. We want only to pass through and nothing else." But the king of Edom was adamant. "Stay out," he warned, and mobilized his army. He marched to the frontier with a great force. Because Edom refused to allow Israel to pass through their country, Israel turned back and journeyed from Kadesh to Mount Hor. So here's how that's how that relationship was established. So, and then later on, Solomon conquered the nation of Edom. And later after that, King Jehoram, during the reign of King Jehoram, the nation of Edom rebelled against him. 2 Chronicles 21, 8 through 10. In the time of Jehoram, Edom rebelled against Judah and set up its own king. So Jehoram went there with his officers and his chariots. The Edomites surrounded him and his chariot commanders, but he rose up and broke through by night. To this day, Edom has been in rebellion against Judah. So the rebellion continued. And later on in history, the Edomites raided Judah during the reign of King Ahaz. And 2 Chronicles 8:17 tells us the Edomites had again come and attacked Judah and carried away prisoners. So they hauled away a lot of people during that raid. And 2 Kings 14:7 tells us that King Amaziah surrounded and killed 10,000 Edomite warriors. So you can see how their contact was very harsh and frictional, and they didn't like each other very well. So although other Old Testament prophets predicted the doom of Edom, Obadiah's prophecy is the most comprehensive. Now, Obadiah verse 1 says, "The vision of Obadiah, thus saith the Lord God concerning Edom. We have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle." So here's the first part of that vision. It says that they sent ambassadors to all the surrounding pagan heathen tribes and are calling them to rise up against Edom in battle. In this vision, the Lord God showed Obadiah the future of the land of Edom. And it says, "A report has come from the Lord," he said, "that God has sent an ambassador to the nations with this message. Attention, and you are to send your armies against Edom and destroy her." So this is a pretty strong vision that he's had. And he's speaking to and about Edom. He says, in verse 2 and 4, he says, "Behold, I have made I have made thee small among the heathen." In other words, Edom, by God's will, has become the lesser of all the heathen tribes. He says, "Thou art greatly despised. The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee. Thou that dwellest in the cliffs of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, Who shall bring me down to the ground? Though thou exalt thyself as an eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord." So in verses 2 through 4, he's telling us that they're greatly despised, that their pride has set them apart from everybody else. They lived in these rock cities up in the mountains, and they said, nobody can get to us. And so God says, I'm going to be the one that brings you down. Now they did live in the land. The land of Edom was rugged mountainous territory that was easily defended. As a result, the people of Edom became proud and arrogant, thinking that they were invulnerable in their lofty mountain strongholds, even invulnerable to God. There are a lot of archaeological digs out in that area, and there's really and truly they had something to set themselves apart. It was hard to get to them. But God denounced their arrogance, and he pronounced judgment upon the proud nation. They were deceived in thinking that they were secure in their impregnable fortresses. The Lord declared that they would certainly be humbled. He himself would bring them down. Now verses 5 and 6 says, "If thieves come to thee, if robbers by night, how art thou cut off? Would they not have stolen till they had enough? If the grape gatherers came to thee, would they not leave some grapes? How are the things of Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up?" Obadiah is repeating part of Jeremiah 49:9, which says, "If grape gatherers come to thee, will they not leave some gleaning grapes? If these come by night, they will destroy till they have had enough." What God is saying through Obadiah is that people are going to come, and they're not going to leave anything, and they're going to find all that you've hidden away. God's telling the people that the destruction of Edom will be complete. Nothing will be left. Thieves and grape pickers normally do not take everything, but those who will conquer, those who are coming, who will conquer and plunder Edom or Esau, would leave nothing. The nation of Edom would be ransacked and stripped of her wealth. The invaders would find treasure, probably that's been hidden in caves. The nation would be left poor and desolate. Edom was a relatively wealthy nation due to the commercial trafficking caravans that passed through their nation. Now all the men, and verse 7 says, "All the men of thy confederation," this is their alliances. "All the men of their confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. The Edomites were proud of their political alliances, but God would break their pride and bring them low. All their allies would promise peace but turn against them. The treacherous allies would help push them from their land. The alliances they once trusted in would come to nothing. They would be double-crossed by their former friends. Verses 8-9 says, Shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise men out of Edom, and an understanding out of the mount of Esau? All your allies will turn against you and help to push you out of your own land. They will promise peace while plotting your destruction. Your trusted friends will set traps for you, and all your counter strategies will fail. And thy mighty men, O Teman, shall be dismayed, to the end that every one of the mount of Esau may be cut off by slaughter. The wise men will not be able to help. They will be confused and confounded by the enemy. Warren Wiersbe wrote this: the people of the East were known for their wisdom, and this included the Edomites. Without wisdom, the leaders of Edom couldn't make the right decisions. Without wisdom, the military leaders would not know how to command their troops, and their mighty men would be defeated. Now, verses 1-4 declared that the Lord would bring Edom down for the treachery against his people, the Hebrews. But remember what it said in Genesis 12:3, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the people on earth will be blessed through you. And then again in Genesis 27:29, may nations serve you and people bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. So here's two warnings that the people of Edom should have known about and should have taken to heart, because now that judgment's coming down against them. In verses 5 and 7, the Lord explains how the downfall of Edom will happen. The wealth of the land will be stripped clean. The enemies will pillage every inch of the land. Her allies will abandon her. A trap will be set, and the people will be driven from the border. And in verses 8 and 9, God says he will not bring counsel to the wise men of Edom. T.S. Eliot observed that most of the trouble in the world is caused by people wanting to be important. The nation of Edom said in verse 3, who will bring us down? They were prideful. They were proud. They set themselves above other people. So how does pride cause people to disregard God and fail to help those in need? This is what that first part of Obadiah 1 is telling us, that their pride caused them to disregard God, and they failed to help those in need. Deuteronomy 15:11 says, for the poor will never cease from the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall open your hand wide to your brother, to your poor and your needy in your land. Having announced what God was going to do to Edom, Obadiah gives justification for God's judgment on Edom in verses 10-16. Failing to help those in need, especially family members, brings shame, and Obadiah announced that shame would cover the nation of Edom. Verse 10 says, for thy violence against thy brother Jacob shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. And verse 11 goes on to say, in the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried away captive his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou was as one of them. But thou shouldest not have looked on the day of thy brother in the day that he became a stranger. Neither shouldest thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Neither shouldest thou have spoken proudly in the day of their distress. Verse 13, he says, he gives a list of what they should have done. He says, thou shouldst not entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Thou shouldst not have looked on their affliction, nor should they have laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Neither shouldst thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those that of his that did try to escape. Neither shouldst thou have delivered up those of his that did not remain in the day of distress. In verse 13, he tells them, he says, you shouldn't have looked, he said, you made fun of them, you mocked them on the day of their calamity. He says, you should not have laid hands on their substance in the day. They stole from them. You should not have stood at the cross. They actually blocked the road and cut off those who were trying to escape, and then they turned them over to the Babylonians. Obadiah provides a list of wrongs that the people of Edom had done against their relatives and the people of Judah and Israel. Shouldn't have gloated, rejoiced. You should not have spoken arrogantly. You shouldn't have plundered. You should not have gloated. You should not have seized their wealth. You should not have stood at the crossroads, killing those who tried to escape. You should not have captured the survivors and handed them over to the Babylonians. And verse 15 goes on and says, for the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thy own head. So all the things that they were warned about that they shouldn't have done, God's saying it's going to be put upon you. He says the day of the Lord. This is a day of justice and mercy of the Lord. It refers to the coming time in history when the Lord, who has offered repentance to sinners, but on that day God will punish the wicked and reward the righteous. He's telling the Edomites, this is coming to you. Amos 5:18-20 says, woe unto you that desire the day of the Lord. To what end is it for you? The day of the Lord is darkness and not light, as if a man did flee from a lion and a bear met him, or went into the house and leaned his hand on the wall and a serpent bit him. Shall not the day of the Lord be darkness and not light, even very dark and no brightness in it at all? Amos gives you a very good understanding of what the day of the Lord is going to be like. You run from the lion, but you run into a bear. You go into a house, lean on the wall, and a serpent bites you. It's going to be all darkness. So this is what the people of Edom are looking forward to. More than any other nation mentioned in the Old Testament, Edom is the supreme object of God's wrath. Psalms 83:5-18. This is verse 15. So persecute them with thy tempest, and make them afraid with thy storm. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Lord. He's speaking to the Edomites. Psalms 137:7. Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof. In other words, they stood there and shouted, destroy it, destroy it. The judgment of Edom is spoken of in Isaiah 4 times. It's spoken of in Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Joel, Amos, and in Malachi. In Joel 3:19, it says, Egypt shall be desolation, and Edom shall be desolate wilderness, for the violence against the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. Verse 16 goes on to say, for as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the heathen drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been. The drinking refers to the cup of God's wrath, just as the heathen, with Edom's approval, caused Judah to drink of that cup and dispossess them of their goods and national place, so all the heathen, Edom included, shall drink the cup of God's wrath and pass out of existence. In Lamentations 4:21-22, it says, rejoice and be glad, daughter Edom, you who live in the land of Uz, but to you also the cup will be passed, the cup of judgment. You will be drunk and stripped naked. Your punishment will end, daughter Zion. He will not prolong your exile, but he will punish your sin, daughter Edom, and expose your wickedness. God's judgment is that Edom will feel the awful anger of the Lord. And while Israel's exile for her sins will end, Edom's never will. Verse 17 says, but upon Mount Zion, but upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. Upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance is a promise of salvation on Mount Zion, where God sets his anointed king. Psalms 2:6. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. There shall be holiness means that there will be a remnant, and the character of that remnant is holiness. And the destiny of this holy remnant is to possess their own possessions. In other words, they will regain the land of inheritance of the Jews. Verse 18 says, and the house of Jacob shall be fine, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble, and they shall kindle in them and devour them. And there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for the Lord hath spoken it. And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. Both Jacob, the house of Judah, and Joseph, the house of Ephraim, will resolve their differences and form one kingdom to execute judgment against Edom. And the desolation of Edom will be complete and total. The joining of Judah and Ephraim was also spoken of in Isaiah 11, 12, and 13. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcast of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. The envy also of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. It's also spoken of in Jeremiah 3:18, Ezekiel 37, and Hosea 1. And verses 19 through 20 says, and they of the south shall possess the mount of Esau, and they of the plain the Philistines. And they shall possess the fields of Ephraim and the fields of Samaria, and Benjamin shall possess Gilead. And the captivity of this host of the children of Israel shall possess that of the Canaanites, even unto Zarephath. And the captivity of Jerusalem, which is in Zepharad, shall possess the cities of the south. The places mentioned in verses 19 and 20 cover every direction of the compass. God's people will be gathered, the remnant. The people of God's kingdom in the south shall possess Mount Esau. The remnant will inherit the Philistia. Gilead will fall to those of the Israel hill country and belong to the tribe of Benjamin. So all the people of the remnants will be called back, and they will fill the country in all directions. Verse 21 ends and says, and saviors shall come up on Mount Zion and judge the mount of Esau. The kingdom shall be the Lord's. This says saviors. These are the prophets, the judges. The Judeans who had been taken into captivity will come back as deliverers, and they shall reign over the people of Edom. Nehemiah 9:27 says, so you delivered them into the hands of the enemy. So you delivered them into the hands of their enemies who oppressed them. But when you were oppressed, they cried out to you, and from heaven you heard them, and in your great compassion you gave them deliverers who rescued them from the hand of their enemies. This is the remnant coming back to Jerusalem. The kingdom shall be the Lord's. Obadiah is quoting Psalms 22:28. For the kingdom is the Lord's, and he is the governor among all nations. Israel will be restored as a nation, as it says in verse 17. Israel will occupy the inherited land, as it tells us in verses 18 through 20, and she will be ruled by her king. Chuck Swindoll wrote, Obadiah's prophecy focuses on the destructive power of pride and arrogance. It reminds us of the consequences of living in a self-serving manner, of following through on our own feelings and desires without considering their impact on those around us. Do you struggle to set aside your own wants and desires for those of God and others? Though such pride has been part of the lives of fallen human beings since the tragedy of the fall in Eden, Obadiah offers us a stark reminder to place ourselves under God's authority, to subject our appetites to His purposes, and to find our hope in being His people when the restoration of all things come. So that ends our lesson today. Next week we'll take a look at Micah. So I leave you with these words of wisdom from a lady named Sherilyn Kenyon. Life isn't finding shelter in the storm. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Thank you again. Have a great week, everybody.